Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Philosophossum. Joining me today for an interview is fellow YouTuber Mr. Merchant. Mr. Merchant, would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hello, anyone who doesn't know my channel exists. I am Mr. Merchant. Chances are, if you see me with Possum, you would see me more in the comments, which is very rare to begin with. I very rarely comment. I make libertarian content. I haven't done any recently simply because I've been in college, and as a result, I haven't been making a lot of content that I would really want to make. So, as a result, I haven't done any videos as of recently yet.
Okay. So, what kind of videos do you typically? I've seen a couple of your videos prior to this. Do you want me to just kind of briefly describe what your channel is all about? What your videos, what kind of content you cover on your videos?
Yeah, so basically my channel, it's a libertarian channel, but it's not like your stereotypical libertarian channel. Simply because I want to be original with my work and respond to things that haven't been responded to. So I'm pretty sure, most libertarians have done was it News Broke? The
Yeah,
one that called, yeah,
yeah. Responding to
um,
that one's like a libertarian YouTuber rite of passage almost.
yeah, usually I don't like to sort of copy off of people. It feels unnatural to me, and I want to feel like I'm actually someone you can actually watch with a different way of viewing things, as opposed to saying the same thing as Mr. Dapperton said, Esoteric Indies said, Filthy Heretic said, what you say, stuff like that.
Right, I hear ya. And oftentimes, I- I'll sometimes get inspired by watching a response to a video from someone else. Like I'll watch one person will make a response to a video, and then I'll watch it, and I'll think, I can offer my own unique perspective on. If I feel I can offer my own unique perspective on it, then I'll go ahead and respond to it as well. But if not, then I usually try to not respond to things other YouTubers have already responded to. But one video of yours, in particular, that I remember, I think you responded to Rags on a video about net neutrality.
Yeah, I did. That was one of those. I mean, I wanted to also do the Dishonored Wolf. I don't know if you know him or if anyone else knows him, but he was another skeptic YouTuber, except he didn't have a dog. He had a wolf sort of persona.
Okay.
Um, it was hard for me to do at the time, but yeah, I did respond to Rags. I mean, I didn't really see anyone else respond to it, so I thought, hey, I might as well do it since no one else is. Um, and I mean, the thing on that video was I was trying to distinguish myself from Red Pill Philosophy as a content creator, because he was just calling people names and not really trying to make that good of an argument against it. Um, and I wanted to actually feel like I was the person actually being against net neutrality. Because another example is like in the whole loot box is gambling sort of
Oh yeah,
um out of YouTube.
the
It's
Jim
like
Sterlings.
the Jim Sterlings, the Rags,
Yep.
generally the people who support net neutrality and support loot box regulations with very little to really no voice opposing it, and that's something that I feel like I want to do and something I need to do just so it doesn't go unchallenged.
Right. I hear you. It's always exciting when you find content that's like uncharted territory. Like for me, that was kind of Professor Stick. Like I noticed, like I came across Professor Stick's videos arguing in favor of a lot of the pandemic restrictions, like mandatory masks, mandatory vaccines, things like that. And I thought, no other libertarians have touched this guy's content. So I get that feeling of like this is me charting out this is uncharted territory for the libertarian community. So I kind of had that feeling myself when with Professor Stick.
Yeah, I forget what the meme or who said it, but it goes like it's
Exactly, new
new
territory,
ground for
and that's always exciting.
yeah.
But
I mean,
anyways,
that's not.
um, go ahead and finish what you were saying.
I was just gonna say that. I mean, that's probably gonna be the main part of my content, but also like a few rants, things about gaming, and I mean, I did. I don't know if I want to do parodies because I got my first copyright strike from it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but the last thing I wanted to do, I'm pretty sure most people who watch your content know about FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education,
yes.
and their little story thing out of frame.
I've
So,
heard of FEE. I haven't heard of that specific project from them.
so out of frame is basically a there's a person who responds to some of the topics in their videos. So, for example, they did one on the Iron Giant, and he Sean, I believe is his name. He talked about how so the main story of it is that the theme is that you are who you choose to be, and he sort of relates that to individualism and choices and whatnot. And I want to go that similar direction. However, for me, I would prefer to try to make it more libertarian related. Um, like for example, the movie Bug's Life is and Ants is very interesting, not just because they're both ants and good movies made by studios, but they also add some interesting takes on it. I mean, I'm pretty sure you know who Vicky 1999 is.
Yeah,
She made her own video on Bug's Life, and I wanted to see if I can make mine. I mean, I don't want it to be a response to hers specifically because I'm not really going to be interested in responding to people when I'm not really trying to. So as a result, I'm gonna just sort of stick to my own thing. But if I ever mention it, I'll just mention it and that's it. I'll just say, "Hey, Vicky's made this video on Bug's Life about communism, whereas I'm gonna make it more anti-statist, anti um, government, pro individualism, pro libertarianism, whatnot."
uh,
Sort of explain how and stuff like that.
okay, so sort of similar type of content, but just sort of a different interpretation of it.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, that sounds interesting actually. And I guess is there anything else you want to kind of talk about in terms of introducing your channel to everybody? Or
Um, I'm sure I already said that I don't usually do it because of school.
right? Yeah,
What I'm gonna also try to do is get into scripts because I feel like my channel, when I speak, it feels uninteresting and my voice doesn't really it sounds less like how someone would talk and more quiet and not very well edited. And I think it's probably best if I get rid of some of my videos, and then start fresh, or maybe just keep some of them here and there, but just recreate it and make it more better. I guess is
yeah,
something I should do.
yeah. I can understand that position. I couldn't really help you with that. I'm not really an expert script writer. I, I've most of my videos are done by improv. I never really bothered with scripts, But I feel like some of my older videos, like my oldest videos from like a year ago, it's before I began YouTubing before I really knew how to edit audio and do things like balancing and like noise cancellation and things like that. So some of my really old videos have like not terrible, but not the best audio, not the same quality as I have now. So I'm thinking about possibly redoing some of my older videos for that, primarily for that reason. But anyways,
Yeah,
if you have nothing else to say in regards to introducing yourself and everything, I guess we can get into the main topic that we were planning on discussing.
yeah. So we have 6 topics that I tried out. I guess we should start with the first one since it's the first one,
Yeah, sure.
which is funny to say. So the first one is our political journey to libertarianism. Do you want to start, Possum, or should
Uh,
I?
since you're the guest, I'll go ahead and let you start first.
Okay. So for me, to make a long story short, the best way I can say it is that, like most libertarians in the back alley sort of crowd, I was I watched many of the anti-SJW channels like Sargon of Akkad. Well, actually, I didn't watch him much, but I watched She One Head, um, Armored Skeptic, those kinds of YouTube channels. Mostly because, before SJWs even existed, I started to more or less identify as an atheist. And I'm still am an atheist. I just consider myself more secular now, since, of course, there's a lot of atheists I don't agree with, or some I do agree with. But so from there, I started to sort of become more Republican in my views. But then I slowly, over time, like once Trump started to run in 2016, I felt like I sort of gave up the idea of like the system representing me as a whole. I mean, the choices were Hillary or Trump.
I know, right?
Neither,
You know, there's something wrong with the system when your choices are freaking Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump.
yeah, and it was more like 2019. Um, so during that time, I was still considered a minarchist. However, I started to look into my ideas more, and I thought to myself, well, maybe taxes aren't bad if it is voluntary. And the one thing that really got me to sort of get there was, so I'm pretty sure you heard of the men going their own way movement, or MGTOW for short, right?
I'm,
In the
s-
MRA.
yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with it.
Okay, so basically, a channel I follow is called Turd Flinging Monkey. He's a MGTOW minarchist YouTube channel.
I've
Um,
I've heard of him. I've seen a few of his videos.
yeah, I mean, I used to enjoy him, um, but then usually I have this idea in mind when it comes to YouTube channels, is that um you're 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 either hated for the wrong reasons or the right reasons. So from that, I watched a video or looked at response videos responding to TFM, because chances are he's, I mean, I know he considers himself a monkey, um even though like he is still a person who has like flaws and maybe not good arguments. So I sort of went out of my comfort zone, tried to look for responses to TFM, and one of those responses were esoteric entities video on him, as well as filthy heretics response to him. And then from there I sort of watched more. And when it comes to Shane Killian, I believe it was his "Are Republicans for Small Government?" That was the one that got me to Shane.
Yep.
And then the more I watched their videos, the more I got closer to anarcho-capitalism. And then I created my, well, I tried to create my own um anarchist ideology called anarcho-memism. I would have liked to do more to flesh it out. However, I just don't know how, especially with all the other philosophy channel. I mean, not channels, philosophies out there of anarchist thought and libertarian thought and so on. And philosophy is not really something I'm typically good at, simply because I don't know what to do and there's so much stuff out there.
Yeah, I hear
Um,
you.
so I sort of just abandoned it, and for now, um I now consider myself more a voluntarist, simply because you don't have to deal with the baggage that comes with either libertarian or anarchist or capitalist.
Yeah.
Um, I've been on Nate the Voluntarist live stream about is capitalism libertarianism. I wanted to sort of make my position clear, but unfortunately he didn't give me the chance, so I'll say it now. So my biggest problem with the pro-capitalist people is that they try to make voluntary exchange and government in the same thing. So, for example, you would see a minarchist or a conservative advocate for free markets, even though they really don't. say they support it. They, like, for example, conservatives say that they're for free markets, except when it comes to porn and drugs.
Yeah,
So
or
that's
they
sort of,
support tariffs.
and terrorists too. Yeah, that's definitely a big one. Um, but then at the same time, I'm also not a anti-capitalist because, well, they're not really they're really hostile to people who say they're capitalists. They either lie, use revisionism, or try to, like, for example, I'm pretty sure if you remember like your high school years, you would remember that um they would say that like the racists believe in limited government or free markets, and that might have been true at the time. However, it sort of poisons the well and muddies the water in a way, and that's something I don't want or don't like. So therefore, I just say free market because even though that sounds similar to capitalism, it's not capitalism in a way, and thus it's not really a burden, I guess, or it doesn't have any baggage that comes with it compared to the word capitalism, since that has many different definitions and it could mean anything if we were to ask 15 different people.
Right. Uh, Personally, I prefer the term free market just because I think that more specifically targets what I advocate for. Because again, like you kind of mentioned previously, the term capitalism is kind of vague, and the problem with using vague terms is that they can be interpreted in multiple different ways. So when someone says I support capitalism, that could mean you're supporting a laissez-faire free market, or you could be supporting the sort of corporate capitalism that conservatives prefer, where there's a free market to an extent, but there's also regulations and taxes and things like that. So really, because capitalism is such a vague term and that can incorporate any number of ideas, I personally say I'm in favor of a free market.
Yeah, but I usually try to follow up just to still make it clear. So if someone asks like, "What do I think about economically or my economic positions?" I would say I'm pro free market, and what that means is that I am fine with people either trading with currency or not in order to get one thing or another through voluntary means. I think that's a lot better than just saying I'm pro capitalist, I'm pro communist, I'm pro socialist, yada yada yada.
Right, because I think when you use terms like voluntarism, I feel like that's a term that more kind of hits to centrally to the point that I just think all interactions should be voluntary. I don't care if you want to start a business. I don't care if you want to live a sort of communal lifestyle. I don't care if you want to uh, run a business according to Marxist principles. If you want to have like a workers' co-op or a commune, I don't care. Just keep it to yourself and don't force it on anyone.
Yeah, that's mostly what I want as well. Unfortunately, that some people don't understand that. But anyways, your turn, Possum, for your political journey to where you are now.
Sure. I guess the best way I can explain it is I sort of started off, and I imagine a lot of libertarians start off here as well, in a kind of a limbo, where I was sort of self-evaluating my political views, and I've realized I don't really fall into the two mainstream political camps, conservative Republicans or like liberal Democrats. I don't really fall into either of those categories, and I guess that's sort of what started my journey down to maybe there's a third option out there in terms of like a political ideology. And the more I looked into libertarianism, the more I realized that this might be in line with what I believe. And then I actually did research on things like the non-aggression principle and just found out how much sense it makes. And I think I've just as I did more research, I slowly started to realize that this is the political, I guess, affiliation I feel best represents what I believe.
Yeah. So, did you start out from like Republican or Democrat, or did you just
Well,
weren't?
I've when I first got involved, when I first got interested in politics, and I was real young too. I think I was like in middle school. Uh, when I first got interested in politics, I was leaning kind of Republican, just because I live with a conservative family. I grew up with a conservative family, and my parents would always watch Fox News, and they'd always support Republican politicians. So I think I just kind of grew up in that sort of milieu. So I think that's probably why, even though I'm a libertarian, I still kind of lean right, and I think it's just because that's sort of the belief system I grew up with my whole life.
Okay. For me, it was more that, the Republicans were considered the anti-SJW area. Of course, there were Democrats more left-leaning people like Sargon and, those guys, but I'm pretty sure this sort of helped Trump, since I'm pretty sure most of the SJW kind of people were pro Hillary or pro Bernie. Not that you can't be for either or though.
Right,
Um, so I sort of I like with Republicans and Libertarians, since that was sort of more who I was as a person, um, and who I was more connected with in that way. So when the 2016 election came along, I couldn't vote yet, but by the time I could vote, I wouldn't vote because I didn't wouldn't think it would be worth anything.
right, because
Um,
neither of the candidates. I think I was in that similar position. Like the first election I was legally able to vote in was Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, which is kind of like being asked, would you rather be punched in the face or the stomach?
yeah. And the thing was, I would have considered myself a Trump supporter, but not a voter in that sense. But I didn't support him because, yeah, I thought he was like the best person ever to lead us. I thought, well, between option A and B, I'm going to take option A because I think option B is a little bit worse.
Right,
So we got there, and I mean, since then, I didn't feel like, Trump didn't really live up to much of his promises. He did, in a sense, deregulate some of the economy. I just wish, like other libertarians, he would have done more. But
right.
yeah,
I think like any politician, you can say there's some good and bad things that he did. For example, Donald Trump. Some big things I give him credit for is reducing regulations, especially a lot of the during the Obama administration, a whole bunch of these nonsensical, burdensome regulations were put in place, and one of the first things he did in office was do away with those, which I really think was good. Another thing that he did was he he was famous for cutting taxes, which is partially true. He cut taxes for the wealthy. Most people in the middle class didn't see a tax reduction. Actually, there was somewhat. I think there was somewhat of an increase on the middle class actually during his presidency, which I feel was kind of misleading because uh, when Donald Trump was first campaigning, he said, "We're going to reduce the tax burden on the middle class," and he kind of did the opposite. He cut it for the wealthy and sort of transferred that burden to the middle class. And another thing he did I'm not a fan of is he was pro gun control. During at least during part of his campaign. His position on that may have changed, but I remember he was in favor of a lot of these draconian red flag laws that a lot of states were implementing. And I remember he was big on tariffs, big on a lot of laws that restrict travel across the border. I think he was in the center of that controversy of like families being separated at the border. So as much as there are things Donald Trump has done that I appreciate, on the whole, there's a lot of other things that he did that I'm not a fan of.
yeah. He would have. I'm forgetting what there. Of course, was the infamous controversy about the Muslim ban, the not allowing. I don't know about the LGBT one. The military LGBT part,
Right?
and then I mean, the only thing I thought was interesting was that he was the first president to enter North Korea.
Yeah.
That's interesting to note in history. But yeah, I didn't feel like he was definitely the kind of person I would have wanted. I mean, I didn't want Gary Johnson. I mean, say what you will about Trump, at least, you know, he's not going to be very afraid of China and stuff like that. But that's besides the point. I don't know if it was just me in middle school, but some people asked when, like back in 2012, what the what did I think of Obama becoming president? I just didn't know at the time because, of course, I wasn't interested in politics. So as a result, I kind of just didn't have a I don't care attitude. And it was great because of course, didn't care. And then once I did, started caring, which was during the beginning of the 2016 election. That's when I sort of felt more depressed and stuff like that.
Yeah, I almost kind of miss the days when you too young to understand politics and you could just kind of not pay attention to it. In a way, I do kind of miss those days.
Yeah. So, no one asked you, whenever it was the 2012 election, like, do you think, what do you think of Barack Obama? I guess not because I felt like I was the only one who did that,
Right.
or if someone asked me it.
I remember the Obama versus McCain election. I think that was what 2008. No, no, that was 2008 or 2012. I don't exactly remember because it was so long ago. But I think that was like the first election where actually 2008 was Obama versus McCain, and then 2012 was Obama versus Romney. So yeah, it was 2008, and I think that was the first election where I started to actually kind of somewhat get involved with politics, someone kind of pay attention to what was going on. And I remember not being a fan of some of Obama's policies, like raising taxes, and I generally remember being more sympathetic with McCain.
Yeah, I mean, as much as the early 2000s were like bad in certain areas, it was technically a lot better in certain cases than it is now.
Right.
Like YouTube was definitely a lot better since it was technically jumping off by then.
Yeah. I
Plus,
actually, it's funny you mention that because I just earlier watched a video by Emperor Lemon where he talks about how YouTube used to be good back in the days, and now and how it got like completely ruined now. I might link to that video in the description because it's actually a pretty good video. But go ahead and finish what you're saying.
yeah, I miss I don't know if the early 2010s was like when free speech was like something people considered essential but I guess it doesn't really feel like it's
Yeah.
that valued anymore.
Well, I think the early
Um
2010s is sort of when the whole censorship, social justice, PC movement kind of started. And I remember back in the early, it wasn't prevalent as it is now back then. Like now you have people clamoring for like fucking pronoun laws and shit like that. But I remember back like 2012, 2013, the early 2000, the early 2010s, that sort of culture was kind of starting to first initially brew. Like you had controversies around like feminism and SJW culture and stuff like that, but it wasn't really the as mainstream as it is now.
yeah, I mean of course there were bad things about the early 2000s, like of course the obvious financial crash, the war on terrorism, NSA, the TSA, the Patriot Act, stuff like that.
Right.
That's definitely not good, especially for our decade that we thought was going to enter an era of peace and prosperity,
Exactly. Yeah.
which it didn't. Sort of,
Yeah. People thought that once the 2008 economic crisis was over, that we would experience a period of prosperity, which for I mean a brief period of time we kind of did, but then things started to slow down again.
and then we also thought the same was going to be for 2020, and yet here we are.
Yeah. Well,
That
they said that after the pandemic was over, which for all intents and purposes it is. I mean, vaccination rates are really high. Cases, hospitalizations and deaths are down. For all intents, I mean, there's like Democrat politicians trying to drag it out, saying no, you need to wear a mask even if you're vaccinated. For all intents and purposes, if you look at the death and hospitalization numbers, this shit's basically behind us at this point. But people said, yeah, after the pandemic is over, we experience an economic recovery. You know, there'd be a massive boom to the economy once all the lockdowns and stuff were lifted, and that would have been the case had Biden not taken had Biden not been in office and be able to implement all of his policies that are causing inflation.
Yeah, I mean, the inflation and stuff like that was going to happen regardless of who would be president. It's just it's a big deal now because Biden's in charge, and no one who voted in the 2020 for him, they didn't vote for him as a person to vote for. They voted for him because he wasn't Trump in that way. And yeah,
Right.
that's really not a good sign for voting when, I mean, it's not surprising that the January 6th riot, quote unquote, I say quote unquote
Right.
because,
Yeah.
I mean, they were allowed in,
Yeah.
which, yeah, that's very suspicious. And, I mean, you would expect DC to have more security, but I guess not in that case. I mean, when you're told that voting is like the most important thing to do and each election is the most important election ever in human history, then of course you're going to have something like the January 6th thing happen. So to
Right.
me, that's not really surprising. It's just, it didn't, I mean, it would be one thing if they actually did overthrow the democracy or overthrow the government as people say they did. They didn't. I mean, I wish they actually did, so then we wouldn't have to,
Yeah.
be dealing with Biden stuff and all the problems in DC. But
Yeah.
eh,
People are saying the January 6th riot was an insurrection attempt. Not really. I think they're probably just a bunch of far right whack jobs who were just bored one day and was like, "Hey, let's go stir up some bullshit." I mean, I'm not like defending what they did, obviously, but like it's I think calling it a riot or an insurrection attempt is overly. I think it was probably just a bunch of people who are bored, basically.
yeah, it's funny how like when it started, they were all just like walking out outside, and when the door was open, they like I don't want to say marched in because that implies like they're like a established force. It was more like they ran in, waited in line between like
Yeah,
the bars, and then started stealing some stuff. But
it's kind of funny when you watch the videos of this so-called riot. You're expecting like all hell breaking loose, people getting in fights, all violence everywhere, and you look at videos of it, and it's just people like wandering around the inside of the building. Like if you didn't have any of the context, you'd think they were just tourists.
yeah, like if it's gonna be called a riot, let's actually like make it a riot. I mean, we had plenty of that. I mean, it's kind of surprising that when a riot actually happens, it's only when the government does it.
Yeah,
But when everything else gets burned down, no one cares. No one sees it as a riot. It's just a protest, even though
right.
it's not.
Yeah,
So that,
exactly. That's why I know
yeah,
that a lot of these same people who are like worried about the January 6th riots, they have no problem with all the BLM and Antifa riots. Because I'm not again not defending what the guys did in January 6th. I'm not like defending that, but like if you compare that to a lot of these BLM and Antifa riots, that makes the January 6th event look trivial.
yeah, it's, it just tells you something that when it happens to government, everyone freaks out, but when it's not government related, they don't freak out as much.
Yep, exactly. And
Um,
you know, because all the property that was damaged in the January 6th riot was all government property. So they're basically guaranteed to get all that shit replaced on the taxpayer dollar. The property that's destroyed in like BLM and Antifa riots is private property. So when those people have their property destroyed, they're on their own. More often than not, they might have like an insurance policy that might help them out, but for the most part, they're on their own. That's why,
yeah,
like, when people on the left say that make this whole big deal about how awful January 6th was, I'm not inclined to really believe that their concerns are genuine because uh, a lot of similar type of events where there's massive like property damage and people getting hurt, they either don't care or they outright support it. So like, I'm not compelled to take their concerns seriously and believe that it's genuine.
yeah, and I mean, if that really was a riot and really a threat to anyone, I'm pretty sure they would have had more guards, and they would have opened fire on a lot of them to disperse and flee. So
Yeah, exactly. That's another thing that kind of raises eyebrows about the whole January 6th incident is that you have a whole mob of people flooding into this federal building. Like, not just any federal building, like the seat of the legislative branch of our national government. Like, you would think that you'd have, like, Secret Service uh, on their way into that building. There'd be helicopters, all kinds of, like, tactical vehicles pulling up, people being arrested left and right. Ah, people being arrested left and right. So, if this really was like a uh, just a random, not planned, not coordinated riot into the Capitol, the response would have been a lot bigger than it actually was. So, because the government took their sweet time actually doing something about this, that kind of raises eyebrows. Like, maybe not saying that the entire government was in on it, because obviously people did end up getting in trouble for this, but certain people within the government maybe helped coordinate this. Kind of makes you raise eyebrows when you think about it.
yeah, I also heard that. I mean, I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard that AOC was at the Capitol at the time, even though like her office is a bit far away from it. I don't know if that's true, and I'm pretty sure someone can correct me on it if they're watching it right
I
now or
remember I remember that. I think like Ben Shapiro made a video about it. How AOC was tweeting about how like scared she was about all these rioters in the Capitol building when it was confirmed that she wasn't even in the building at the time. And AOC was trying to say like, oh, she had PSD because of this horrible, tragic event that she was forced to witness when it was confirmed she was nowhere near the Capitol building during the riot.
yeah. And then there's the 2020 election, which for as bad as it is, I don't know if it would be on 2016 levels of bad, but what's funny is that um, it was basically a litmus test to whether they would be consistent, and of course they wouldn't be consistent. That's like
Right,
asking them to do too much. But so basically, if you're um, if you think Russia hacked the election, even though there was no proof at the time or now, but then you believe that the election results were fine, you were you're definitely a hypocrite. If you're a Trump supporter who thought in 2016 there was no election fraud, well, not election fraud by Russia, that is, and then in the 2020 election you thought there was election fraud, then I would like you to prove it and not be a hypocrite.
right. I remember there was some controversy. There were audio clips of a phone call released to the public between Donald Trump and some politician in, I think it was like Georgia or Ukraine, some Eastern European country, that they're using as proof that there's something wrong with the election or some attempt by Donald Trump to influence the election. I don't know how much credulence there is to that. I haven't listened to the call in its entirety, but that's a lot of evidence that's currently being used to imply that there's something not so kosher about one of the recent elections.
Yeah, I sort of like when he talked about impeachment, I couldn't care less, but yet it was the most thing like talked about um in my college and basically anywhere.
Right,
So of course it's like I don't want to hear this. I don't want to listen to this thing. That's not going to really matter to me. And
right.
well, a lot of people, and it. Unfortunately, I couldn't escape it as much as I tried.
Yeah,
So
I think they tried impeaching him twice. The first time it didn't go through because the way I understand it, the way that it works is that in order to impeach a president, a majority of the Senate has to vote for it. And there were two attempts. First one didn't really make it to the Senate. Second one made it to the Senate, but they didn't have enough votes to actually go through with an impeachment trial. So they were trying to do it, but it never really happened.
yeah, I'm just glad it's over since I don't have to deal with it anymore, and I
Yeah,
can finally just relax on that front of it. Um, Yeah, we got a bit off topic, but that's fine. Um, these one, these next topics seem sort of, I guess, something we've already said. So the next one is, why do we have our current beliefs that lead us to libertarianism? So, like, what belief or idea led you to libertarianism outside of ideology?
That's a good question, actually. I guess the biggest thing is that uh, libertarianism just seems so like straightforward. Like, hey, don't hurt people, don't take other people's shit. Like it just like it's basic rules that all of us like intuitively understand on a day-to-day basis. Like we know, hey, don't go up to people on the street and punch them. Hey, don't break into people's cars. It just seems like common sense, but also not just from an intuitive, common sense standpoint, but also from a rational logic standpoint. The non-aggression principle and self-ownership all just seems to make perfect logical sense. So I guess that's how I would answer that.
All right. For me, it was two things. One, it was the public education system where basically you don't really like you have rights, obviously, but at the same time, it's also like you don't have rights at all. Um, Plus, like they limit what you do online with their ISPs. There are some things that I would have been fine if they got rid of, but like the ISP servers of schools sometimes don't discriminate between what kids should actually be looking at or could look at versus what they actually shouldn't be looking at. Like
Right.
obviously they shouldn't watch porn, but at the same time they also block sites that weren't really. I mean, sure they might have been gory and stuff, but chances are the average kid now plays Call of Duty and other mainstream video games. So the idea of like blood is going to scare them is something ridiculous. It would have made more sense if this was like the 19. Well, I don't know if the 80s or 90s were like that bad because they didn't have computers to begin with. You more or less had to read books if you didn't like interact with people.
Right.
But still, it's like it's really burdensome. I mean, it's already bad enough that I have to wake up, be forced to go to school to learn something I may or may not be interested in,
Yep.
and the fact that if I decide not to go, I get sent to jail or the equivalent of it. And I forget what it's called. It's like
Truancy.
truancy, or I forget what the name is on the top of my head, but it's oh yeah, juvenile delinquency, I believe. Is that
Yeah.
true?
Yeah. So basically, if you're under a certain age, and the age varies depending on states, if there's a separate legal system for people under that age called the juvenile legal system. So you would go to presumably you get less of a harsh sentence or less of a harsh punishment if you're being tried as a juvenile.
Yeah, and so I wanted anything that wasn't school related. Um, like an example of it is like how in science classes or really any class that involves like getting in groups, there's always the group assignments where no matter what anyone else does, you're all graded equally. I think that was
Yep.
really dumb in class. It should have been the people who actually worked should have gotten a good grade, because of course there were people who were lazy and well, you had the people who were lazy who didn't obviously care for good reasons, and then you had the people who actually cared because they wanted to pass a grade and not have to deal with their parents being angry at them.
Yeah. It's kind of like military logic. One person fucks up, everyone gets punished.
Yeah, it makes no sense. It would have been like I would have preferred if I did it on my own, and every time I had that option, I would have obviously taken it.
Yeah, I hear you. I was the kind of person I always prefer to work by myself on like projects for school and stuff. Because really, it depends on who you're working with. So, for example, when I was in high school, I took shop class, which, by the way, is an awesome class, and I hear a lot of high schools are getting rid of it, which is really a shame because you learn some really great skills in shop class. But when I was in shop class, we would always, luckily, I had friends that I knew personally well in my shop class, so we had no problem getting along and working together. The problem is if you're in a class where you may not be familiar with everyone, and you're stuck with people who you may working with people whom you may or may not get along with. I can understand how that can be tricky.
For me, it was more the other students were just either lazy or wanted to socialize, and I'm not really the kind of person who would socialize as much. I would prefer to be on my own.
Right,
Um, Another thing that got me to it, let's see, I said school. Oh yeah, basically wanting to be free because I feel like I um wasn't free and not currently free yet. Like I sort of value the idea of anyone can do whatever they want. I want to be left alone and do my own thing. Um, and I think movies were also an influence, but not too much of an influence when compared to the other two. Because you watch movies like Braveheart and like The Matrix, movies that are obviously pro freedom and the idea of being free is better than being tyrannized. But yet, when people walk out or don't watch the movies, they sort of forget that that could be influential. Um, and I wish that we sort of used other examples, um, and used movies specifically to sort of teach people some characteristics or traits. But I mean, that's just me.
right. I actually now that I think about it, one thing that kind of made me really become a libertarian was the drinking age. I remember when I was like 20, and I was 20. A lot of my friends were 21, and when we all go out to the bar together, they could order beer, take shots and shit. I was stuck ordering soda. So and I was like, what the fuck? I'm a grown ass adult. I can drive a car. I can drive 2 tons of steel, down the street around people. I can own a firearm. I can do all this dangerous shit. But no beer, no beer. That shit's dangerous. You need to wait another year. So I think just having to deal with that sort of government logic. That was my first big experience with government logics, dealing with the legal drinking age.
Yeah. Um. So, what? And I guess you already said your current beliefs that led you to libertarianism, right?
Yeah, basically, basically, I had two main reasons that I'm a libertarian. One is intuition, common sense. The second one is rational, logic based, if that makes sense.
Okay. And to recap mine, it was the fact that I considered school prison, and I mean, people can argue against it, but I see more reasons to believe it is like prison, as opposed not just on the grounds of like the student to prison pipeline, I believe is what it was called,
Oh yeah,
or like
definitely.
I mean, yeah, that's a problem. Um, Although the main issue was that people considered it was less funded, and yeah, some things could use funding, but if the current education system and the military in the US is anything to be learned from, it's that you can have a lot of money and still have, crappy systems. And you can
Exactly.
also have the inverse where you can have systems that work better despite not having so much money to do something. You
Yeah.
also see this in the video game industry. Like the AAAs are increasingly getting worse and worse games being created,
Right.
whereas like indie titles are doing better despite not having enough money as a AAA company does.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned the example of video games because I'm a huge gamer myself, and I can tell you that there's these big AAA companies. They have billions of dollars poured into their development for basically these canned cookie cutter, like what we're on like the 20th Call of Duty right now, versus you have these indie developers coming out of the woodwork with shoestring budget, barely any experience, and they crank out these really high quality games. So I really think that's a very apt analogy. Regarding the school system specifically, I think that even from a non-political, non-libertarian perspective, I think most people can agree education in our country isn't the best. Even like non-libertarian people are like, yeah, the schools that we're forced to go to kind of suck. So
Yeah, for those, the thing is, I think they see the problem. It's just they don't see what is actually causing the problem.
right,
Like, of course, for a Democrat, the solution, well, we just need to throw more money at it, throw more taxes at it.
yep,
But I mean, we still have bad schools. I mean, in my high school, we have a laptop, but yet I'm pretty sure we're not above average learning.
right,
And I don't think test scores really matter when you don't even know like what basic mathematics and basic science is. Like that's really the problem. We're more. I mean, there's many problems with schools. I don't think it's just let's throw more money at it or let's. Um, I don't remember what the conservative position is. I think they were pro-choice, but the pandemic sort of made me think they weren't pro-choice. Um, but still, it's just the solution is not just to throw more money at it
right.
or try not to solve it.
Right, because you can look at data in terms of like education budget versus outcomes. The Department of Education is one of like the highest funded federal agencies in our country, and its budget seems to increase every year. And on top of that, school performance, average performances from students are sort of uh, either declining or on a plateau. So very clearly, there isn't like spending more money isn't the problem. When you look at actual performance, one of the big problems with schools is sort of the way that access to education is distributed. Like right now, uh, the big way that public schools are funded right now is through property taxes. So schools in wealthier neighborhoods get wealthier schools. Poorer neighborhoods are stuck with crappier schools, and and people blame the free market for that. I'm like, what free market? The tax systems that you people advocate for are causing the certain the imbalance of school funding that we see.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was just again, I don't know if it was just me, but um, it's weird how like schools talk about how suicide is bad, but yet they don't in any way link the school system to part of the problem. I mean,
Right,
yeah, there's other ways you can commit suicide, but I mean, what generally like makes you suicidal is like depression and not having a good enough sleep schedule, and that pretty much matches with how we do schooling, which is early in the morning and tons of stress for the people who care, no stress for the people who don't even care.
right.
I mean, yeah, there's many problems with the school system. Um,
Like
but to get
tons of
back
them.
on track,
Right. Okay.
I mean, I know movies are not something you would typically say like inspires you or something you really think about, but that one's interesting to ponder on. Plus, I really wanted to be free, mostly because my parent, my parents, my dad doesn't really, I don't think he's religious at all, or he doesn't show any religious attitudes. My mother is Catholic, and she was born in a family of Catholics. Um, so she made me or forced me to go to church, and yeah, I understand that as a parent, you want me to, have morals and stuff like that, but to me, it felt like church was more like a secondary school. And the last thing I wanted whenever I wasn't in school is to go to a secondary school.
Right.
Um, so it made me hate the church more, almost to the point where I thought it was a good idea to like burn it down or kill people. And I mean,
Yikes!
my
You
only
must have really
option,
not liked church then.
yeah. So um, I wasn't given much options, and when I did, of course, my mother would be upset that I didn't go to church. And the options were do chores on the house or go to church. And obviously, since I didn't want to do chores, I had to go. And anytime I chose the opposite, of course, my mother would be mad. But I wish she would just understand exactly why I would not want to go to church, or maybe it's not because the reasons she think it is. Maybe it's just I don't know. I just don't like going somewhere I don't want to go to,
Right.
and it's already bad enough that you're literally thinking it's a good idea to make me go to school, where I'm being forced to learn things against my will, whether or not I actually want to enjoy it or not, whether or not I have good enough sleep, or whether or not I consider it worth doing. But yeah, that's part of my problem with school and church and
Yeah.
stuff
So
like that.
I grew up in a Catholic family. My parents like super religious. So like every Sunday, I remember when I was a kid and I hated this. I had not only did they make me go to church, they made me go to like a Sunday school too, which was like an hour long. So like every Sunday, I had to waste basically 2 hours of my life in church and in like Sunday school. And I remember not being a fan of that.
Yeah, and just to be clear, people, when you not only like make your force your kids to go to church even though they don't want to, plus when you're able to vote and decide how people should be forced to do something, don't be surprised when people like me get upset at religion and religious people. Now, granted, I have taken a more softened approach because I know it's not really like the pastor or anyone else's fault that they're Christians or that they go to church. It was more my mother made me go to church, and I did not want to go to church. That was really my main issue. It wasn't the pastor or anyone else going to church. It was my mother making me go, despite me not wanting to.
Yeah, I never understood parents forcing their kids to go to church because like kids aren't like going to give a shit about like the Bible or religion or anything like that. I mean, when kids are like when they're old enough to like understand religion, I could kind of see encouraging them to go to church. But like 5 year olds, they're not going to give a shit about the Bible. They're going to sit there bored, just wanting to go home. They're not going to give a shit. So I think it's kind of pointless to force kids to go to church because they don't understand religion and they're probably not going to care.
Yeah, it probably would have been better if I was given the option, or if I was more in my teenage years and basically it was more like a recommendation, like, hey, do you want to, like try to see religion? And I would have been more open to it. I mean, I don't know if I would have liked going to church, but at least I probably would have had a better perspective or a better opinion of the church and Christians than
Right.
I
Yeah, because then
did.
maybe wouldn't have left a bad taste in your mouth. Because for me, I was never really a religious person. I'm not anti-religion. If that's if going to church and reading the Bible, if that's your thing, cool. You do you. I just personally never feel like I got anything out of it. And I think again, having it basically forced onto me, having it made into a chore, is probably what kind of turned me off to religion.
Yeah, me too. So anyways, next one we did it is, I mean, next topic, I mean, is why did we start our YouTube channels? Um, I think we already did this again.
Uh,
So,
Actually, funny enough, I did a interview with the Dark Conservatarian about a week ago, and this topic came up in that interview. Basically, I just felt like I could give liberty a voice. With left-wing big government is kind of the mainstream perspective, and I feel like liberty needed another voice, and that's basically the gist of what. Like I have a computer, I have a mic, I have some basic editing software. I can do this.
yeah. Are you there?
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. I'm sorry. I completed what I was saying. You can go ahead and if you
Okay.
want to share your perspective on this issue.
All right. So for me, I felt more like I was a person watching, like, for example, if a YouTube channel was like a screen showing a movie at a movie theater, then I would be like the person sitting down watching the movie. sort of like what every follower or subscriber does when they watch videos. Um, so I wanted to at least like be open minded to the idea of trying it. But once I started trying it, I felt like it was a bit more difficult than I would have liked it to be. And it really is. I mean, it feels somewhat like a chore just to edit videos out, try to make it as good as possible. But I think in the end, it could be worth it if I really give it the best I could with the amount of time I'm given. Um, so just to finish my answer, it's just I wanted to give it a try and then also responded to, again, some things that weren't really talked about and sort of give my own personal takes. But I also acknowledge that by having a channel and by, having a more, I don't want to say a public face, but by putting myself out there, I of course um give myself to the criticisms and the issues with the internet, like mass doxing and stuff like that. So that's definitely going to be an issue.
Honestly, it's kind of funny. Like when I had a bunch of Professor Stick fans mob on that one video, I kind of got a laugh out of their angry comments.
Yeah. Um. I mean, I'm like most people starting out. I think I, like to have this big, grandiose plan, like, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and it's going to be like this really cool idea of a channel. But I mean, soon reality slams you hard in the face with the fact that you don't really know how to edit too well, and your videos, if they're going to be good at all, are going to be good enough to where some people will watch it, whereas most people would probably watch the more bigger channels.
Yeah. Honestly, it depends what you're doing it for. Like I'm not doing it to gain clout or anything like that. Because let's be honest, we're not like a popular position. We're not taking the popular position here. We're telling people, no, you can't have your free stuff from the government. No, you can't have your magic free this. We're taking a sort of unpopular, non-mainstream position. So obviously, if the goal here was to get clout or popularity, we wouldn't be choosing the libertarian platform now, obviously. But but yeah, I mostly do what I do because I want to give my opinions a voice. I want to uh, sort of start a dialogue on certain issues I feel are important to discuss. And generally, I also just kind of enjoy it. It's fun making these videos where I sort of break down and try to understand different issues and try to formulate a position based on arguments. I just enjoy it. Even if I didn't have any subscribers or didn't make any money, because my channel's you have to have at least 1,000 subscribers in order to be able to monetize, and I just have just under 300, so I don't make a penny off of what I do. I have like one patron who donates like $2 a month. Other than that, I make like no money off of what I do. So it really is a hobby or something I do out of passion.
Yeah, same here for me. I mean, it's obvious as like the topic of not just libertarianism but political stuff in general. It obviously gives us a smaller scope than people who like there are lore channels like Star Wars, Halo, people who just like only talk about the the stuff about those franchises as opposed to the more like outrage or someone who is more negative of either of those two. And yeah, our positions are unfortunately unpopular, and our views and subscriptions sort of reflect that reality is that we're obviously the minority in a system where mostly a majority could affect what people do. Um, I mean, I like you, Possum, and Rags. Also, I do this more for fun. I never cared for what was popular, what is the most. I mean, having money is good, but it's not something I would strive to do because usually when you have integrity and you try to give yourself a reputation, it sort of has to, keep in check your own greed and self interest. Um, Plus, I also really wanted to sort of learn like where I could improve, where could I not improve, could I be right, could I be wrong? If there, if I'm wrong, is there something I can do to make it better? And if it's wrong, is there something that I'm missing or not taking into account? That's something I generally want to be interested in as a YouTube channel because I know I'm not. I mean, I like to think I'm special, but I'm no one important to anyone else who does not personally care about me. So, generally in high school, I always had this idea that to me it doesn't matter whether you're the most popular kid in school or like the most good in grades, although having good grades isn't important when it came to school. It was more like, do you have anything personality wise that's not related to popularity or being rich or stuff like that? And that's something that I think more people generally do. It's just when we think of high school, we tend to obviously think of like the jocks versus the nerds and the
Yeah,
geeks and
it's funny
you know
watching. It's funny watching movies like Mean Girls. Like
in High School
yeah,
Musical.
yeah, like like adults. Like this is how adults think high school actually works.
Yeah, it's actually a lot worse than those. I mean, I didn't want to sing or dance because
Right,
I'm not a good singer or dancer, but I mean, I would prefer that than like studying a lot and doing a lot of work. That would have been more fun. But yeah, high school is definitely not what the movies show you or tell you.
right. It also probably depends a lot on where you go to high school. Like for example, the high school I went to, the town I live in isn't that big, so obviously the high school wasn't that big. We had maybe I don't know 400 students max. So it wasn't like a huge high school. So you usually in a lot of larger high schools you get more fragmentation into like cliques. But since our high school was smaller, there's a little bit more unity among the students.
It's weird for mine because there wasn't really cliques. I mean, there could have been clubs, but there it wasn't like once you join the club, it's like your little gang or posse of like band or choir members. It was just what you were passionate enough to join or be a part of
Right.
outside of school.
I never really did activities in high school. It's like I'm already there 8 hours a day, plus I have additional homework and studying to do. Like by the time I got off at the end of the day, I just felt like too exhausted to really stick around and do anything else. So I mean, as much as I would have probably been a good thing for me to maybe get involved in some activities in high school, I didn't really feel like it because it just felt like all the classes and homework just drained me. College is kind of different though, because college you can kind of there's more flexibility to sort of work around your own schedule. So there's more flexibility for me to get involved in like clubs and activities in college, but it wasn't really a thing I did in high school.
Yeah, I can do clubs now. It's just I prefer to do more academic stuff
Right.
simply because I'm not there to be part of the frat or be part of the clubs that are out there. I'm more there just to you know work there, get my degree, and basically just do something.
Yeah, I went to
Although
a
I'm not really in the degree program.
right.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead and finish.
That was basically it.
Okay. Yeah, I went to a small community college, so we didn't really have like frats or anything major like that, but we did have clubs and organizations that I would get involved with.
Yeah, and as every person should know, if they do go to college, don't go to it just because there's party or to get the experience.
Exactly.
If, if you want to do that, just like go near a college and like try to go to a party that way. I mean, for one, it's free, and for two, you don't really have to pay any debt to anyone.
Exactly. Like if you just want to go to college for like the party atmosphere, and I'm being dead serious here, be a furry. Be a furry. We go to conventions. We party. We party hard at our conventions. Like I'm not even shitting you. Crazy shit happens. So if you're going to college just for the party atmosphere, be a furry. I'm not even fucking kidding you. Really.
It sounds a lot funny to me. Because usually when I think of party at college, I think of like a frat party where like there's non furry people, but it wouldn't surprise me if there were furries. And I
Uh,
did see a few fursuit people and my college during like Halloween
okay. Oh,
time, and it
that's
was very
cool.
funny.
Yeah, that's cool.
It was cool, but it was like very weird because I usually like see furries on the internet only or like on a video, but it's very rare to like actually see like someone
In
in
one
the
of those
same
suits.
area.
Yeah.
Yeah, like in the actual suits, like in my physical location where I'm actually like by myself and like being the real me. It's just odd because like you see
Hold on one
people
second.
dressed in.
Yes. Sure. Yeah. What's up? Yeah, that's fine. Yes. Will do. Thank you. I see you. Yeah. Sorry about that. Uh, anyways, yeah, it's kind of. I remember the first time I went to a furry convention. I was just in awe looking at all the fancy suits, and then a few years later, I end up having one of my own.
To me, it was just weird seeing someone with a fursuit in the same general area and in real life as opposed to on the internet on videos or on Twitter or somewhere else.
Right? Yeah, I hear you.
All right. Next topic, unless we have something else to talk about, is the what do we plan to do for both of our channels, and how do we hope to achieve libertarianism?
Sounds good.
No, that's the
All right.
topic.
So, do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Um, I think I should start first simply because I don't have too much to say on at least the latter.
All right. Go right ahead then.
So um, my plan is for when I'm have a lot of free time and I'm not focused on schoolwork, instead of playing video games and wasting my time that way, I would spend it on making scripts. And then when I get home from university, I'll be back here at my house where there's not people that could listen in, and I can do it in the privacy of my own home. Um, so that's generally my idea until I graduate college, where once I do, I'll hopefully figure out what I want to do after college, like get a job or something related to it. And then when I have free time from that, I would start making more content, more videos. That's really as far as I'm thinking right now, which is like a year or two in the making. It's just I need to make a lot of scripts because I have a lot of ideas for making content.
Right.
As for to achieve libertarianism, it it's a strange thing to me because like there like compared to other solutions, like what you would expect from political entities. So, for example, a Democrat would say, "What's the solution to solve like inequality?" Well, the solution to them is to just vote and um, make people pay more taxes, and that's something I can't do as a libertarian. So then a conservative would say, "Okay, we need to spend more time on the military and force people to be religious if they're not going to be religious on their own." So I can't go with either of those options as a libertarian. But the thing is, because libertarianism doesn't require necessarily a perfect solution or one solution to go down, this actually gives us both many options to figure out what our solutions could be to solve it, but it also gives us the problem that since we don't have a clear defined solution, it's not as simple as say voting or um more government involved per se.
Right.
I mean, people like Eric July make his own band called Backwards. Others create the Free State Project, where libertarians sort of meet together. There is what's it called? There's Free Liberland and see land as more libertarian nations trying to be built.
Yep.
Um, so and those are things that like are more passion based than like more okay, this is our solution. We're gonna all sit down and like figure out what the solution is to the problem. For me, I can't say I really have a perfect solution. I just have a solution that could work in tandem with other ones.
Right.
Hold on
Okay.
for a second. Um, just a second.
Take your time.
Okay, so my solution, um, at least from what I can think of, is um mostly just like survival stuff. So get plenty of food, water, and stuff like that. Um, and then what I would hopefully like to do is try to either start my own country, like a place where libertarians can be when there is no other place for them, or my solution is to sort of create a more libertarian community, but not have it so dependent on a lot of people showing up. It's more okay. This is a free trade sort of zone for people that trade stuff. Like how in movies, like in apocalyptic movies, they have those markets where people can trade certain stuff like bullets for like a can of corn or something like that.
Yeah.
That's really the idea of what I want to try to create. However, the problem with both of those is that by having like so many libertarians in one area, it makes it very easy for the government to, sort of arrest everyone and kill everyone there.
Right.
Um, then there's also the issue of by individually trading with one person or another, that sort of creates the problem of that since you're alone, you're more likely to be individually harassed and threatened as someone trading outside the government. Like I don't consider myself an agorist yet. I support counter economics. I just think there's also other ways we can do it besides just counter economics. Um, so that's generally my solution is to more create like little patches of markets to where I mean they sort of do this in the black market and stuff already, so it's not like something totally out of outlandish or not real. But I mean there's still other solutions I'm probably not considering, especially since again there's many solutions and not every solution works well or is consistent, and that's sort of the issue. It's why I don't take secessionism as like a viable strategy because once you secede from the main government, the federal government, then you have the state government and then the local government and then your city or town government, and that's going to be now granted it's better than the federal government doing it, but I mean it's still a state, it's still someone who is going to force you to pay for stuff against your will.
Right. Uh.
Um, so that's basically all I have for now as someone who's like thinking on the top of my head, being recorded right now. So
Right. I
your
hear
turn,
you.
Falcon.
That's one of the reasons I'm not a fan of doing live videos, just because it's hard to think of what to say directly on the spot. Uh. It came up in our conversation last week with the Dark Conservator, and he asks me why I never do live streams. It's one of the reasons. But anyways, getting back on topic. From what I understand, you had two questions. The first is what's sort of the future plans I have with my channel,
Yeah,
and then all right. So I guess starting off with that one is for right now, I'm pretty much just going to continue doing what I was doing before. I took a brief hiatus for work-related purposes, but I came back from that obviously. Once I'm not sure. I'm hesitant to provide like an official schedule for when people can expect videos, just because I've advanced to a higher position in my job, which means I'll have more responsibilities. So I'm not sure what my schedule is going to look like in terms of when I'll be available to make videos. So I'm hesitant to give people like an official like new video every week or every month or whatever. But uh, I do plan to get back into YouTubing, and of course, once my channel starts to grow, like I said before, I'm not doing this for money. Like I'm doing this for passion. But let's say my Patreon takes off or my channel gets big enough to be monetized, I might look into, say, improving my equipment, maybe buying a better mic, getting some better editing software so I can use like effects and stuff. Uh, so that's and of course, once my channel gets bigger, I might start doing regular live streams like a lot of other YouTubers are doing. So I have some plans. Nothing's definite as of this moment, but I do have sort of an idea of where I sort of want to take things. And then I guess the other question you had was, what sort of plan do I see going forward to sort of implement libertarianism? I guess is the question.
It is.
Okay, cool. I know you mentioned. Sorry. I know you mentioned secessionism. Interesting. I just watched a. Are you familiar with Tom Woods?
I'm familiar with him. However, I haven't watched his stuff.
Okay, he did a podcast episode about secession. There's a big secession movement in Texas because obviously they're sick of Biden's bullshit. There's big conversations about secession in Texas. And the interesting thing is that whenever you discuss secession, people just kind of take it for granted that it's sort of like a guarantee that secession is totally not a thing that you should be able to do. There is no way that once states join the union, they're part of the union forever, and there's nothing you can do to change that. And the debate sort of being brought up in the Tom Woods episode was like, well, why? What's necessarily the case for you know not allowing secession? Because there's nothing in the Constitution that says states are not allowed to secede. Nothing. When and they all talked about the Civil War when the issue of secession was sort of at the forefront in American history, that there's nothing in the Constitution that said states are not allowed to secede. So Lincoln kind of had to make up a reason for preventing the secession, and of course he went with slavery, which of course I'm not saying that I'm defending slavery, not at all, but the idea is that we're against forced association, so we're going to implement forced association. Like, what, really? But yeah, so Lincoln just kind of pulled that authority out of his ass to he had to make up some kind of reason because there's no constitutional authority for the federal government to stop states from seceding. He had to kind of use slavery as a pretense to engage in the Civil War, and that they went over that in the podcast episode. But I think secession is a solution. It's part of it, but I think it's not the entirety of it. The way I see it is that there isn't one single correct approach. It's one of those issues in life where there isn't one single correct answer. There's actually several strategies, and likely you'll need a combination of them. So, secession is one of them. Another possibility is, like we discussed, homesteading or seasteading. Um, that one's a little bit impractical because you need a lot of money to do that. You need to be able to either buy an island, which and I've looked at it before. There's actually a website where you can buy islands. If you're like a mega rich person and you just have like 65 million up laying around somewhere, but you can buy an island. You can also make one like they do in Dubai. They dredge up material from the seafloor and they build artificial islands. Or what they did in England, where they had this abandoned World War II era oil platform, and a bunch of people came across it and just like, fuck it, this is our country now. So seasteading or creating another country from scratch is also another possibility. Another possibility is sort of getting people on board with libertarianism, and I think this pandemic, as awful as it has been, as frustrating as it has been for libertarians, I think in a way it's sort of a golden ticket for us to sort of explain to people, look, government doesn't fix your problems. Because if you look at everything that happened in the pandemic, everything the government didn't help. Lockdowns didn't help. Mask mandates didn't help. The one thing that did help, the vaccines, came from the private sector. So everything that made the pandemic worse, lockdowns, mask mandates, came from the government. everything that helped deal with the pandemic, like tests, drugs, vaccines, came from the private sector. So I think this pandemic is like the big example of how the free market deals with problems better than the government does. And I think that we as libertarians can really take advantage of this opportunity that the pandemic has provided us to say, look, free market fixes problems, government makes it worse. And I guess that's a bit of an oversimplification, but that's sort of the gist of it,
Yeah, it's a silver lining, but unfortunately, we didn't capitalize it when it was at the chance of starting.
right?
Even some libertarians think thought it was a decent idea to lock it down, or
Yeah, because
still
that's
think it's
yeah,
still think it's a good idea to force people to be vaccinated. Unfortunately,
yeah. I saw an article somewhere that said something about the libertarian case for vaccine mandates, and it's like no libertarian supports vaccine mandates. Even libertarians, like I know that both Shane Killian and myself are libertarians who are pro-vaccine, who've taken it, who encourage people to take it. I know there's libertarians who are more skeptical of it, like Young Ripa said he never plans on taking it ever. But I think whatever your personal position is on whether or not you're taking the vaccine, I think in order to be a libertarian, you have to agree that that's a personal choice at the end of the day.
yeah, and you would expect the option as a libertarian would be okay. You don't want to take the vaccine, fine. You do want to take the vaccine, fine. Take the vaccine, and then period. That's it. No more. But unfortunately, we have to get into the argument of how like we need government to freedom somehow. It doesn't make any sense, and of course, there's the idea of like um probes being in like the vaccine, and you can be tracked with the vaccine,
Yeah,
which
I heard about those all those conspiracy theories.
yeah, it's ridiculous because I mean, one, the robots would have to be very, very small with all those things. I mean, if they were talking about a sci-fi movie, then fine, it would at least make sense because I know it's like not real and it's fake, but it makes no sense. It doesn't become practical. It's like a world government. Like, I mean, it's already hard enough for politicians to, you know, rule a county or nation alone, and people are going to think, oh, the government's just going to like secretly group up with other nations who have conflicting interests. They're just going to like magically like sit on their chairs and like everyone's going to be like chained to the neck and like he's like in movies. No, it's not going to be like that. Makes no sense. It's impossible and practical. But then there's for the other for the second part, which is like tracking people that already exists, and you don't need a vaccine to do so.
Yeah, I was about to say if the government wanted to force a tracking chip into you, they wouldn't like backhand do it through a vaccine. They would just straight up say you're mandated to get a tracking chip. And also, another thing I have to consider is that making a microchip small enough to be injected with a needle is really, really difficult.
Yeah, you're more better off putting it in a pill because at least a pill can is like big enough for you to put like a not a huge chip but a small enough chip to like for you to swallow and not notice.
Right.
So yeah, it's really dumb when I heard that. Um I mean, there's also like the NSA and TSA again and the Patriot Act. So if you were worried about privacy, where were you during when the early 2000s when those were actually big issues on privacy?
Yeah.
It seems that you either didn't care or you thought it was a good thing at the time.
It's funny because a lot of these people who are fear mongering about tracking chips in the vaccines are like the same conservative right leaning people who are pro TSA, pro NSA, pro Patriot Act. So it's like, yeah, guys, sorry, we're not buying that. You're all of a sudden concerned about individual privacy when it comes to the government.
Yeah. Um I would go into the last topic, but it's basically um answering questions from a live chat, but I'm pretty sure we don't have a live chat. The stream is not live, so
Yeah, I didn't. I pre-recorded this stream. Like I kind of mentioned before, live streaming isn't something I've really done before. I have no idea how to do it, or once my channel gets bigger, it's something I'll look into doing. But for right now, it's not something I really plan on doing. But of course, to anyone watching this, though, if you have questions for either myself or Mr. Merchant here, feel free to leave them in the comments. I do check my comment sections. Of course, Mr. Merchant, feel free to re-upload this on your channel, and you feel free to also answer any questions people may have in the comments.
okay. Just make sure to send it to me when it's over the video before you actually upload it. Um, so since we sort of got through the topics already, um, I just wanted to mention a few things before we kind of wrap up.
Sure.
Um, so I'm pretty sure like the only reason people on your channel even know that I exist is simply because I either comment on there on your channel in the comments section, or it's that one article I sent to you and you responded to it, which was why it's okay to yell at
Yell at people
people
who don't
who
wear
don't wear masks.
masks. I remember that article created quite the controversy when it first came out.
Yeah, that first one I was confused 'cause it's like, okay, I see the title, I see the picture. It's obviously gonna be pro mask in a certain way. When I read it, I was like, okay, it's gonna negatively talk about how people wearing masks are like the evil people who need to be locked up or shot in the back or something. But then it like talks about more positive things. I'm pretty sure you already mentioned it. So
Yeah,
then I sort of got confused and I was like, wait, maybe. I mean, I thought this article was going to be like your normal pro mask sort of article to see, but I guess it was all right. I mean, I thought it would be a lot worse than expected,
yeah,
but
same here. I saw the tagline of the article and I thought, oh shit, this is gonna be really bad. And then I read it, it was actually surprisingly fair. It was most of it was in favor of like very Socratic type of dialogue, having conversations, and it seemed like it was pretty fair. But of course, at the end there, it does suggest yelling at people, which I never understood. I never understood the logic behind these mask shamers. Like you're concerned that these people not wearing masks pose a danger to your health, yet you're going up to them. Like if I was concerned that someone might be a danger to my health, I'd be keeping my distance. I would be minimizing contact with them. Meanwhile, you're going up to them to like get in their face and everything, you know?
yeah, I mean, I think what the title should have been called is like pro maskers and then say how to convince an anti-masker. I mean, yeah, it wouldn't make sense to call people anti-maskers, but I mean, it would at least match with the article in question.
Yeah. Like if
So
it
it's like,
go ahead and
yeah,
finish.
so it's like, hey, pro maskers, here's how to like discuss or talk about why someone should wear a mask. Instead, it's like like if you read it and looked at the picture it showed, of course, it's gonna like turn people who aren't pro mask or are neutral towards wearing a mask are gonna be turned off and not really want to if that's what their goal was.
Right, and I think that another thing I thought was kind of like if the article was just like here's how to have a conversation about masks, and they cut out the part at the end where it just says yell at them, I'd be like, okay, cool. That's actually still not necessarily on board with the whole mask shaming thing, but at least it would be fair, you know. But it had the potential to be at least a somewhat decent article, at least from an argumentative standpoint. But then they go full brainlet at the end. It's just like, dude, really?
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the psychological studies were, whether or not shaming actually works as a incentive to stop people from doing something.
Right.
Is that true
Um,
or not?
generally, I always go by the maxim, you catch more bees with honey. So I think that like shaming and being nasty isn't the best strategy to get people on your side. Even though in some situations it might be tempting. Like, some things it's really tempting to just go off and say you're an asshole. But I think in most cases it's better to be civilized because you're much more likely to get your point across if you're being like civilized and uh, courteous.
Yeah, and that's something I don't understand for why people think shaming is going to somehow change people. I
Right,
mean, it will affect them, but it won't affect them in the way they would want it to be.
right.
And that's something I think people need to understand that that's not a good thing because imagine if someone came up to you and like shamed you for something. Of course, you're not going to have a positive opinion of the person, but you're also not going
Yeah.
to have a positive opinion of the things they say.
Oh,
So
I've
it's
had
sort
that
of
happen before. I've had that happen before where I'll be in a furry chat and someone will say, "This event is vaccine only," and I'll ask why, and I'll say, "Do you have data to support that requiring vaccines will keep people safe?" And instead of having like a conversation, they'll screech and be like, "Ooh, you want to kill people? Ugh." And it's just like, and in those situations, they'll just say "fuck it" and leave the chat. I don't fuck with that bullshit.
yeah. You also mentioned how like one time in your videos you said that like you mentioned Ben Shapiro once and like some was it a raccoon persona or
It
was
was
it
I remember what you're talking about. It was a dolphin persona. It was
or
a
a dolphin
chat.
persona?
Yeah, it was a chat. I think it was Long Island, New York, and one person there had a dolphin persona, and this person was pretty far left. And I remember in the chat I just mentioned Ben Shapiro, and the guy lost his shit.
Yeah, that was at least funny for me to think about. Like I imagine in my head you would be saying like, "Hey Ben Shapiro," and then like the dolphin would be like, they wouldn't be clapping, but they would be like, you know,
Yeah.
diving on the water so much,
Yes.
freaking out. It would have been funny if that was true, but it's not. So then, I mean, I watched plenty of your videos. I don't remember how many subscribers you had. I think it was like 109 or somewhere close to 117. So that was like when you were making a lot more videos, but just not making as many as you did now.
Right.
Um, and like the more I saw your videos when it came to like free association, I thought about how like you know the progressive voice and people who argue we should have anti-discrimination laws in the books. I think now this is just how I probably would have done it if I was in their shoes. I would basically argue um like discriminating against gay people, discriminating against black people and stuff like that is not good and you shouldn't be discriminated because of it because it's not a choice. Like you can't choose to change your sexuality, you can't choose to change your race, you can't choose to be disabled or not, for example. Whereas it would be okay for like no shoes, no service. You have to wear clothes once you enter and stuff like that because I mean those are choices you make. Those aren't something inherent to you as like a person with like certain characteristics, if you get what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
But since this is, you know, the pro big government people who are never consistent in government, so it's not really the kind of argument they would make. And but by having this standard, of course, they remove any chance of trying to be having no standards. I mean, of course, the other side is not consistent too. Um, so for conservatives, they say they care about religious freedom, but it's more I want to be religiously free, but I don't want other people to be of other religions, of other non-religious things to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of the point of that side, though.
Yeah, that's. I think that's generally just a common theme with authoritarianism. Like, my freedom is important when I want to make my choices, but my freedom is important when I want to make choices I agree with, but other people's freedom isn't important when they want to make choices I disagree with. And I often cite the controversy behind the gay cake as to sort of get that point across. Like. A lot of these left-wing liberal people will be like, "Oh no, a baker should not be allowed to refuse to make a cake for a gay wedding. They should be forced to make that cake. But then the way I commonly argue against that is, okay, should a gay baker be forced to make a cake with a homophobic message on it? They'll usually say, of course not. And then and it just kind of goes back to that central theme of uh, when it comes to something that's convenient for me, then yeah, freedom matters. But when other people's choices are inconvenient for me, then your freedom doesn't matter.
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, if I was in their shoes, I would be saying the standard that I just brought up, which is that um the only things that shouldn't be discriminated against are some things that aren't choices. So obviously, no shoes, no service. You have to wear clothes, because those are optional things you can do as a individual. Um, you can choose whether to smoke. You can choose whether to be religious or not. You can't choose to be black. You can't choose to be LGBT. You can't choose to be disabled or not, and that sort of thing. But again, this is from hypocrites who, don't really think about their own inconsistencies or flaws in their arguments.
Right.
And sort of to piggyback on this idea, so you know how like Democrats and Republicans often argue like we should have drugs but not guns, or we should have guns but not drugs.
Yep.
Um, so basically, I sort of created this argument. I don't know what to call it. I'll just call it um, the item principle. So the idea of this principle is that um, as long as I have this item, gun, drugs, whatever, I have the potential to either kill you with it, kill myself, or harm anyone else if I decided to. And at the end of the day, whether or not I like this item is irrelevant, because as long as no one does anything with it that harms people, when I say harm, I mean actually harm people.
Right.
So like, because yeah, they people who argue for prohibition argue harm based on like society or whatever.
Right.
So the whole idea behind this principle is that this is an item that could be traded for and is individual property that is legitimately owned, and because it's legitimately owned, the person who's arguing against why people should sell drugs or sell guns should have the burden of proof to justify it.
That makes sense.
That's sort of the idea of the principle in a way. I mean, I'm not sure if I did a good job in explaining
I
it,
think I get
but
the general gist of it is that ownership of an item is passive. Therefore, in order for someone else to argue that you should not be allowed to own that item, since they're making the active claim to prohibit something that's a passive action, the burden of justification would be on them. If that's sort of what you're trying to get at.
it's similar. So, for example, I have this microphone. I can do whatever I want with this microphone, whether for voluntary peaceful means or violent non-voluntary means. So I can like hit you in the head with it. I could hit someone. I could beat up a cat, or I could use it to, talk and basically record things and talk to other people like yourself.
Right.
Um, and because I have it so far, it's more on the burden of proof for people who say I shouldn't have a microphone, or I should have a microphone but use it for certain reasons. I mean, unless I'm, you know, hurting people physically or mentally with it.
Hold on one
Um,
second. Yes. Yeah. What do you need? Yeah, give me about 5 minutes. Okay, I'm back.
You have 5 minutes of being here, or 5 minutes for the person to respond or something.
That's fine.
Okay. Um. So then, like, it's the people who want me to not have this microphone or to use it a certain way should have the burden of proof to justify why I should, as opposed to me just owning this microphone and not harming anyone. Um. Again, I'm trying hard to the best of my ability to flesh out this principle and how it can be understood by the average person and how I could
So,
identify it for someone.
I guess what you're getting at then is that an item in and of itself doesn't really cause harm. It's the way it's being used that causes harm.
Yeah. Um. I mean, generally, when both sides argue for what they should allow, they say it's not intentionally harmful to anyone else. So thus, I'm taking that line of reasoning and sort of trying to sort of say like this thing in my hand could do anything. It's what I choose to do with it that matters.
Right.
I guess is the best way to say it.
Okay, I suppose that
Sort of
makes
like
sense.
how, yeah, sort of like how in the Iron Giant, the main theme of it is that you are who you choose to be. Well, this item is what I choose to do with it in that way.
Okay.
Um,
I haven't watched that movie in a long time, so I'll have to rewatch it to familiarize myself. I think it was
yeah,
like
I mean,
seven when I watched it last.
it's a very good movie, and I think it's weird because like as time progresses, shows and movies sort of become more dumbed down and
Yep.
have less. I'm not saying violence in movies is good. I'm saying it's something that's sort of punished or not something you can do. So as a result, people take less risk and we get more of the same and less bland stuff.
Right. I hear you. I think that's a trend we see in media in general. People doing less risk taking, so we get more repeats of like bland stuff. Like there's a million reaction channels on YouTube. The exact reason is because it's a safe, well-known, well-tested genre.
Yeah, I mean, take like the three television channels that you would usually watch as a kid in America if you watched TV at the time. It would be um Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon of some kind, and Disney Channel, plus whatever other channel you had or wanted to watch. Um, there was a lot of different movies, a lot of different shows. Some were good, some were bad, some were fantastic, and others were forgettable. Um, Now it's more. I mean, this is more like with the sitcoms than the actual cartoons, where it seems all of them were the same. Like, for example, there's one called Game Shakers. It's basically a group of kids sort of create their own video game company and make video games.
I
Like that
think
could have been,
I know what you're talking about. I think I saw like two episodes of that show.
yeah, like that could have been like an interesting concept to deal with because like you could get people in computing, writing stories, and voice acting and stuff like that. But yet, because it's a sitcom and it's a children's sitcom, it's not like really that interesting. It doesn't do anything. It's just a sitcom that just happens to have video games in it.
Yeah, they took what could have been an interesting idea and just went with a generic formula instead of fully exploiting what the idea could do.
And sort of the same thing happened with like iCarly and Victorious.
Yep.
Like they could have spent more time on that than like more of the gags and stuff that wouldn't be interesting. Unfortunately, that would have been a lot better, in my opinion, if they did that, but they didn't, and that's sort of something I am constantly sad about every time I mention it.
Right.
But now it's just we don't really have. I mean, the sitcoms are basically just mostly the same. They don't really have much variation. And then what cartoons we do have, if any at all, it's either great, for example, like Gravity Falls, or it doesn't really strike out very much or doesn't do much difference. In cases like Steven Universe, like I like Steven Universe when it started, but then it started to get more confusing and sort of less interesting as a concept.
Yeah,
Seen with Adventure Time, it was interesting because it was like simple. Like there was the dog who could sort of shapeshift, and the kid who didn't have any powers but could still fight. But then it got into like other seasons that came after that, and I just got so confused and didn't know what to do.
yeah. Steven Universe is kind of an interesting case because the show started off actually pretty good, but then two things kind of happened. One, the fan base got really toxic to the point where like fan artists were being harassed because they drew a character wrong, or that was a controversy that happened a few years ago. Another thing that happened is that the writers of the show kind of got all like woke and liberal. Like I'm sure you've seen those PSAs that were circulating around the internet, where like Steven Universe characters were telling us about like racism and body image and shit like that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure one of them I saw was talking about like how um I think it was Garnet and Amethyst when they ever fused together. They people thought it was like a negative stereotype of black women or black people. I don't really know. It just it doesn't really compute to me as a individual.
Right.
But then for shows and movies, we also unfortunately have remakes. So when we do like get the shows or movies we would want on the screen, it's not the ones we want, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's why I kind of like YouTube because it acts as a good alternative to mainstream media. Although unfortunately, with a lot of the things that have been happening recently with the algorithm and with these sort of burner channels, it's becoming unfortunately a lot more like mainstream media.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that YouTube took the action they did for the first apocalypse. I mean,
Hold
all
on one
they really
second.
could have done.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. What time? All right. All right. I'll get in touch with them. All right. Yes. All right. Okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
I'm back.
so basically, we get the stuff we when we do get a like a sequel or a remake, it's not the one we would want. I think the big example of this is like um what was it? What was it? Like the Kim Possible movie. I don't
Yeah.
think anyone really asked for that movie to exist. I think they would have preferred the cartoon version.
Yep. Oh, what was a big slap in the face for a lot of people was Cartoon Network announced we're doing a reboot of Teen Titans with all the original voice actors, and the whole Teen Titans fan base was like, "Fuck yes!" And then they find out they turned it into a dumb cartoon, and they were like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, Teen Titans Go.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of problem with that show.
Oh my god.
I don't think we need to really go into. It's just, I mean, it's just surprising how like we could have had tons of more cool games, cool shows to watch, cool movies, but yet we're like trying to race to the bottom
I
to
know.
see who can out this. I mean, outdo each other and not like getting people to like our stuff. It's like, how about we just try to do the best we can or do better when it comes to like video games, movies, TV shows.
Yep. I think that's a general trend I'm seeing is I think that people are moving more towards online content as opposed to like mainstream media because mainstream media is just so bland and generic nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, it just sucks that is the way it went down when it could have been a lot better. I
Yeah,
mean, generally anything could have been a lot better than what it is right now, but still, I wish we would have been in a better 2000s where we had more prosperity, more peaceful times, less conflict in the Middle East, and more problems with that.
yep,
All right, so I think last thing I really would want to talk about is more um, conservatives and liberals. When I say liberals, I mean more Democrats than
right.
just liberals. I mean, I want to just say Democrats and Republicans only, simply because like you get confused of what is considered a liberal and a conservative.
Yeah, yeah, because there's a lot of different ideas. The thing, and we kind of touched on this earlier, the problem with using like vague terminology is that it includes a lot of different things, so there's ambiguity as in terms of what you're specifically referring to. Like the term liberal can encompass a lot of different ideologies, and I actually had people. I think it was in my response to Vosh. People in the comments were saying liberals and leftists aren't the same thing, even though the two words are often used interchangeably. They're technically not the same thing. So I try to use the word leftist as much as possible, just because it avoids that ambiguity.
Yeah, I avoid using left and right generally because that means different things to many people.
Exactly.
So, for example, there's three people. There's like George Bush Jr., and then like Ron Paul and Hitler. So that's a nationalist, socialist, something else. Then there's a libertarian, minarchist, constitutionalist, and then a globalist, neoconservative sort of person, which only makes sense because of the political compass, but otherwise would be three entirely different people.
Right.
And I imagine like it's the same thing for the other side because I doubt that like Washington, John Locke are anyway similar to say like Fidel Castro or Mao Zedong or anyone else like that because
Exactly.
there's nationalists on the left too. It's just they are mostly communist and anti um colonialist in that way.
Exactly. There's like hardcore nationalists on the left, and there's also like social justice complainers on the right. So
Yeah, so the way I sort of view it is I view conservative and liberal as more like conservative, liberal, progressive, traditionalist as basically like where you stand socially, and then the more economic stuff will obviously be like capitalism versus socialism versus communism, for example.
right.
Um, and then the actual people with their positions are generally the people who vote, and that's going to be mainly like Democrat and conservative, but it's also the libertarians, the constitutionalists, the Green Party,
Yep.
and all the other parties.
The more statist leaning libertarians.
Yeah, so I'm trying to like make sense of like how it works because obviously, like in the past, you could have called yourself like a conservative Democrat or a Republican progressive or something like that, but simply because of like partisanness and not wanting to be associated with the other side, it's more they sort of pushed each other to that area to where it's now you either have to be a conservative Republican traditionalist or you have to be a progressive Democrat
Yeah.
sort of person.
it's kind of weird because a lot of these political terms, their meaning changes over time, and that's why a lot of them are just so ambiguous. And not helping is that in America we actually name our political parties after ideologies, which is kind of awkward because if the position of that platform shifts, if the platform of that party shifts, then their ideology no longer lines up with their name, and then that sort of creates confusion.
Yeah, so when I say like, I mean, let's take the civil rights issues of like segregation and gay marriage.
Yep.
The conservative position would have been to, support segregation and support um gays not getting married. So then, like a conservative now would obviously be against segregation, but I mean, since 2016, I think there have been more conservatives that have been pro LGBT, but of course, there's still those few traditionalists that are, just trying to go back to 2013, 2015
Right.
when it comes to like LGBT issues. But thankfully, there are some changes in that regard, but still, there's still those people who think like gays are destroying society and destroying everything in sight.
Yeah, all those conspiracy theories and stuff. Yeah, I think that you have to make a distinction between like the old school Puritan conservatives and more neoconservatives. Because I think most modern conservatives would fall in that latter category, and the use and the pockets of like the old school anti-gay conservatives that you'd often see in like Quaker, Pennsylvania, or some shit. You need to make that distinction.
Yeah, and that's generally the problem. Um, like when I was a conservative, I hated that like people like Mitch McConnell and people who are generally anti-LGBT existed because they were, of course, like making us conservatives sort of looked dumb when we argued for our
Yeah.
positions.
I mean, even though I'm right leaning, there's a lot of conservatives I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of Tucker Carlson. I'm not a fan of Matt Walsh. I'm not a fan of Michael Knowles.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of them either, but when you sort of like team up with it, it's like you want these people to either jump off a cliff or not really be associated with you. But at the
Right.
same time, unfortunately, when you live in a system where, everyone votes and everyone gets to decide who gets to initiate force, then of course you sort of have to have them because the alternative is that you get the crazies on the other side winning. And I
Right.
think that's one of the problems with voting and, the way the system works.
Yep. We're
So unfortunately,
approaching.
you have
Huh. Now go ahead and finish.
So unfortunately, it means you have to tolerate the stuff you wouldn't want for your party and what you wouldn't want in your
Exactly.
group when you
I guess
argue.
that's one of the downsides of being affiliated with a political party is that you have to accept all the baggage that comes with that, even if you're not even if you agree with maybe a majority of what that party says. You have to accept all that sort of baggage, and I guess that's one of the reasons I'm not a huge fan of partisan politics.
Well, not just the baggage, but also the people who hold the baggage. Like,
Yes.
unfortunately, you can't just say you can leave. You can't force them out because, and of course, you lose votes, and of course, the most votes are the people who have more influence, and that's the problem. Anyways, you were
Yeah.
saying like we were reaching
We're
a certain
reaching.
mark.
Yeah, we're reaching like the 2 hour mark. Did you want to maybe start wrapping up or?
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to say was the whole like transgender bathroom stuff.
Yeah.
I think what would have probably been better for both sides is if either the parents have not, or have the parents like, of course, be with the child just in case, or have like separate family or like individual restrooms for people. I think that would have sort of helped. Like this, I mean, it wasn't, to me. It's a non-issue to begin with, but if it's really
Right.
that much of a concern of like trans people entering a bathroom and doing horrible stuff to kids, then I think those two options would have worked. I think that the only reason it hasn't is because, of course, businesses aren't gonna waste that much time with doing that.
Right,
Plus the fact that like by the time this was an issue, it was like a quick issue. It wasn't an issue that would last as long as say like abortion or gun rights or stuff like that.
right. And I guess I'll briefly weigh in what my opinion is on this. A lot of places I go to will sort of have like a third sort of gender neutral bathroom for people who aren't really comfortable with a male or female bathroom. Bathrooms, I'm not actually that. I'm a little more lenient on because there's usually a certain degree of privacy even in a public bathroom. Like you'd say you'd say because everyone's like in a stall. You're not really watching each other. You can't really see each other. So let's say like a person with a penis goes into the women's room and goes into the stall. Nobody in there is gonna see this person or know that they have a penis. So on bathrooms, I'm a little more lenient. It's things like changing rooms and shower rooms where people are naked together, and little girls could potentially see a penis and scrotum that they don't need to see. That's where I'm a little more strict on the whole transgender thing. But yeah, generally, I think that a good option is maybe having like a third, because unfortunately, trans people are in that situation where they don't necessarily feel comfortable using a certain bathroom, even though that's like what other people are comfortable with them using. So I think maybe like a third bathroom, gender neutral bathroom is the best way to kind of deal with that.
Yeah, plus like public bathrooms aren't really the best bathrooms, so it's like hardly something like should we really care about a bathroom that
Exactly.
chances are hasn't been cleaned?
I
Um,
know. Like it's like at the end of the day, what you guys are it's sort of like is this the hill you want to die on? Like, look, nobody really enjoys using public bathrooms anyways, right? Like the public bathroom experience is not going to be a pleasant one, whether or not transgender people are in there. So, is this really a hill worth dying on?
yeah, I mean, I would have just. I think we should. What this should have done is just allow people to go into the bathrooms, and then when a problem does arise, if it does, then we can sort of debate and sort of try to figure out a solution and deal with the problem that way. I think that's more productive than just saying let's not let people into a bathroom just because they might seem to be transgender or not. I
Right.
think that's less of a. I think that's more of an issue generally when people oppose something is that they do it based off the fear of something that might happen as opposed to something that would happen or could happen.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's most transgender people aren't like going into the bathroom thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna sexually assault someone." And if someone is looking to sexually assault someone in a bathroom, they're gonna do it anyways. Like a sign that says "No men allowed" isn't in here isn't gonna stop them. So that's kind of the biggest argument against that. Again, this is an issue where I sort of understand both sides of it. And like I said before, since bathrooms you're usually not seeing each other, since public bathrooms still have a degree of privacy, that's an area where I'm a little more lenient. It's like, okay, pick the bathroom that conforms with your gender identity. When it comes to like a place where you can see each other naked, because there's an element of privacy there, I think that's an area where it's legitimate to say no people with penises in the women's changing room.
Yeah. So, anyways, we're gonna end off. I just personally want to say before I at least see how people would react to my outro of what I
Sure.
have. Just that if you want to subscribe to me, you can. If you don't want to, that's fine. I understand if you don't. I'm not going to be active, so I'm not going to lose any sleep or feel bad if you do leave because I'm not producing content, which is understandable. As someone who always like watches videos and like sees whether or not I should or would want to subscribe, I understand the idea that hey, maybe I don't want to subscribe to this channel because it's not active or it doesn't produce good content or anything like that. I welcome any sort of discussion about me or anyone else, as long as it's done in good faith, of course. And I generally want to hear people's comments of what they think and what I could do better on, what I am bad at, as long as it's constructive in a way. I don't want just hate comments because I'll just ignore it.
Right.
I won't send anything. I just will ignore it. So, anything you have to say, Possum, before I do the outro of myself?
Yeah, just first and foremost, thank you very much, Mr. Merchant, for your time coming on the show and giving us the chance to chat. I felt this was a very good conversation. Of course, if anyone has questions for either me or Mr. Merchant, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll be looking through them, of course. And I'll also be leaving a link to Mr. Merchant's channel in the description if you guys want to check out his content, see what his channel is all about. You can go ahead and check out that link. Give him a sub if you enjoy his content. And thank you very much for. Thanks again, Mr. Merchant, for participating in this interview, and thank you for watching. And that's all
No
I have to
problem.
say.
Yeah, no problem. It's just, I mean, we could go on and on about this, but I know you need to do other things, and
Right.
I don't think anyone wants to watch a long hour video unless you're a Mauler fan, which, I mean, if you have that many time, good on you, but still.
Yeah.
um, so here's my outro, whether you like it or not. Um, so it's basically, that's all, folks. And remember, the true cost of freedom is allowing other people to be free as well.
Nice. I like that. All right. Well, thanks again, Mr. Merchant, and thanks everyone for watching. Again, link to his channel will be in the description. Feel free to check it out, and take care. Happy holidays.